Just when
and
we thought
subscribe.
Andy Smith Harris and the Mendeecees were having a tranquil vacation in Mexico, things took a drastic turn that resulted in tragedy and handling. Fans were taken
Yeah,
back
you
when
can't.
what
I
was
couldn't go
meant
live
to
for
be a
like I
peaceful
think it was
getaway
like
with
2
their fellow
weeks.
cast members
They
turned
told me
into a
30 days.
full-fledged
30
brawl.
days.
Disbelieving witnesses said that while tensions had been growing for days, no one had anticipated that they would boil up as they did. After a minute of memes, joking, and laughing, a furious argument broke out, swiftly turning into a violent altercation. And before anybody could intervene, fists were flying. The most startling thing was how fast the local government acted to resolve the problem. Before Yandy, Mendeecees intervened and was led away in handcuffs. What caused this giant commotion? Which cast member was involved? And, most importantly, what MBC will do next are the key questions at this point. Stay tuned for all the specifics, first-hand reports, and never-before-seen information on an arrest that has Mexico in the news. Everything appeared to be going well as Yandy Smith Harris, some of the actors and boys from Washington, got together for what was supposed to be a much-needed vacation. With plenty of downtime and some filming, the holiday was supposed to be a mix of work and play. With tremendous anticipation, fans have been waiting for their favorite scenes. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Yandy and the women Mendeecees were seen conversing and smiling while sipping cocktails by the pool. Yandy's fashionable white summer clothing made her appear stunning. However, no one had anticipated that this purported vacation would quickly turn into a detonating disaster that would lead to the handcuffing of Mendeecees. For a moment, it appeared like everyone was finally at ease with the boys in the resort's private bar, where music was playing and cocktails were flowing. However, tensions were already rising behind the scenes, and the seeds of conflict had already been sown. According to witnesses, the first indications of violence appeared early that afternoon when Mendeecees had an argument with a certain cast member, a man whose name is being kept a secret for the time being. Those who were close enough to hear the talk reported it as tense, with males who were clearly irritated utilizing low voices and hostile body language. At one point, Yandy was even seen stepping in and touching the MC's arm as if to soothe him, but it didn't appear to do much. Insiders claim that the incident started when someone made a remark about DC's past legal troubles, which has always been a sensitive topic for him, and one he took personally. One account claims that he didn't see it as a joke, but rather as a jab at his manhood, his development, and everything he had been through during the first argument. Concluded without a physical altercation, but it was evident that the matter was still open because Mendeecees was observed pacing the resort, shaking his head, and talking to himself in what seemed to be an attempt to calm his annoyance. Dinner came next, and it was served in a classy restaurant by the ocean with an outside dining area that was ideal for a casual meal. When the cast arrived, they were happy, or at least. The other performers appeared to be sitting at one end of the long table, talking and laughing, while Yandy and Mendeecees appeared to be seated at the other end when the plates were served and the drinks were poured. But the quiet was misleading, for the tension that had been building all day eventually exploded with the arrival of the entree. At the beginning, there was a brief exchange of words and some remarks between. Another slick remark from the cast member, who was inspired by the drink and the laid-back atmosphere, is once a hustler, always a hustler. When MC stopped biting and carefully set down his fork, his jaw tensed. "What exactly did you say?" As the table fell silent, Yandy's eyes moved between the two men. Among the men, Mendeecees was the same cast member with whom he had previously clashed. She put a hand on M's forearm and said, "Come on, let's not do this right now," seeing where this was going. However, it was too late, and the actor smirked as he sat back in his chair. He continued, "I'm just saying that some people don't really change. They just learn how to hide it better," in a dangerously low voice, and stood up. "It comes before a storm, so you have one more chance to assault me like that." By this point, everyone at the table was holding their breath, and the nearby security officers warily moved closer, worried that things may get worse. Rather than compromise, the cast member mockingly said, What are you going to do? You have to show everyone here exactly who you are. In fact, everything exploded simultaneously before anyone could react. Men from DC came forward and changed the course of events. Silverware rattled on the oak desk. Glasses fell to the floor and plates smashed. The performers scrambled back, knocking over chairs as they attempted to flee the scene, and the air was filled with gasps. The cast member staggered back into another table after fighting men. DC pounded his fist into his face. He punched himself as he struggled back up, hitting Means in the side of the jaw. Yandy said, "Stop men's STP." But it was too late. The two men were now engaged in a full-fledged brawl and swinging viciously at one another. While the restaurant staff flew into a panic, several of the customers called for security. Security hurried in to try to separate the two, but the man was already becoming red. He shoved one of the security guards aside and flung the cast member to the ground, striking him in the ribs once more as the sound of glass breaking filled the room. Others were running for their lives behind the bar, and customers at other tables either ran or pulled out their phones to record the chaos as it happened. The whole restaurant was in disarray, with patrons still recording and staff hurriedly talking among themselves. He looked at his opponent, who was now cleaning blood off his split lip, and his chest heaved. Their quarrel brought bottles flying from a nearby tavern until, with the assistance of numerous security officers, their faces were covered in hate. The two guys were pride art. Sirens sounded just when everyone believed the worst was over, and a few seconds later, as the dust appeared to settle, flashing red and blue lights flooded the interior of the restaurant. Some of the cast members were trying to soothe Yandy, who was crying now and screaming at everyone to stop before things got worse, but worse was coming. The once thrilling beachside dinner had turned into chaos, and it was only about to get worse. The sound of breaking glass and the shouts of scared onlookers blended with the siren screams through the muggy Mexican night, which was accompanied by flashing red and blue lights that cast strange shadows around the restaurant. As the cops drew closer, Yandy stood still for a moment, her large eyes wide. Mess, who had just been dragged away from the conflict, stood nearby, breathing heavily, her eyes reflecting the approaching police cars, her heart thumping, panic taking control, while the cast member he had fought with leaned against something. This was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, a break from the pressures of home, but instead they were in the middle of a nightmare. He flipped a chair, wiped blood from the corner of his mouth, and muttered curses. "Get him to go." Yandy, one of the actors, whispered in desperation, her eyes darting to the policemen who were already heading for the door, but she was frozen in place, unable to comprehend the reality of what had just happened. It wasn't just some. A simple altercation that would be quickly resolved became dangerous because Mexico was not the United States. The laws were different, and the penalties might be more severe. It was obvious that MDC was in serious danger of suffering such consequences because the police were closing in after the first officer entered the restaurant and spoke quickly to the employees in Spanish. The manager hurried to meet him, gesturing wildly at the broken glasses, the rubble of the overturned tables, and the two men in the middle of it all. "We can't stay here." The police officers, the men from BC, weren't paying attention, and their gazes were fixed on Yandy, a cast member, who suddenly jerked out of her reverie and came to my side, crazily murmuring, "We have to go." Her hands were shaking as she clutched his arm. MC moved closer in spite of everything, his fist still ready to fight, and he grew even more angry at the cast member for continuing to glare at him and grin as if he had won something for allowing things to get this far. "Don't worsen it, please," MC's Yandy begged as he pulled at his arm, but Mink seemed to be out of his mind before he could react. Officers encircled them, shouting at them and pointing at M. One of them took off his handcuffs, intending to arrest him. Yandy immediately leaped in front of me, her hands up in defense, and she began to weep, her voice changing to one of despair. Her comments didn't influence the officers, but you don't understand that he was only defending himself. It wasn't his fault. He had been arrested for violence, and a translator swiftly described the issue, saying that they needed him to accompany them immediately or else they would take him by force. Yandy went to the terrified Miz and cried out, "No, no, no, this can't happen," her voice trembling and her heart lowering as she said, "Please cooperate. We'll work this out later, but you can't." When he saw Yandy's frightened face and the fear in her eyes, something inside of him changed from anger to fear of what this would mean for his future and his family. His jaw was tight in irritation as he slowly raised his hands. But for a moment it seemed like I would fight them, my body taut and ready to resist the police. Because he cooperated, the police quickly turned him roughly and pushed his arms behind his back, and then they placed cold metal handcuffs around his wrists. And suddenly MBC was not a man on vacation, but was going to be arrested and held abroad. "No!" Yandy yelled at her. "You can't take him. He didn't start this. He was just defending himself." She'd attempted to push her way between the MDCs and the officers, but her voice echoed throughout the restaurant. The cops weren't listening, so they ignored Yandy's cries and pushed people to the exit, while the other actors, some of whom took out their phones, stood still, not knowing what to do. He had agitated and irritated MC, and now the men in DC were suffering because of it. Yandy would not sit by and watch things happen. The cast member who had been fighting with male VCs leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression on his lips, clearly surprised at how quickly things had gotten out of hand. The street outside the restaurant was equally chaotic, with police lights flashing as people gathered, some filming, others just watching. He yelled at the officers in awful Spanish and English as they dragged men outside, running after them to see if anyone would listen. "Please, he's not a criminal. You don't understand. He didn't do anything wrong. Let him go." "Don't take him, please," she said, her voice scratchy from screaming as the officers unlocked the rear of the van and roughly hauled the male DCs toward a waiting police van. Yandy pleaded with everyone who would listen, "We'll work this out. Just let him go," and she followed closely after. M turned to Yandy and pushed him inside before the doors closed. Anger and helplessness mixed in his eyes as he mouthed, "I'm sorry." But Yandy's cries and the police sirens drowned out his words, and Yandy's heart ached because she had seen men in handcuffs before and had experienced the highs and lows of his legal struggles. As the police car pulled away, Yandy watched helplessly, tears streaming down her cheeks, as the love of her life was driven away into the night. She had no idea what would happen next or how she would handle this once she was back in the US court system, which was not home, and the laws in Mexico were different. While the rest of the cast was still in shock over what had happened that night, the staff started clearing away the fight's debris as patrons slowly left, talking to each other about the scene they had just witnessed. However, Yandy was not going to let DC sit around in a Mexican prison after everything they had been through. "We're going to fix this, MBCs," she said to herself, her hands still shaking, after wiping away her tears, taking a deep breath, and taking out her phone, realizing that the only thing left to do was to call the lawyer and figure out how to get her boyfriend back home, even though he was free on bail. "Without you, I will not be leaving Mexico." This situation was clearly not going to be resolved anytime soon. DC sat on the couch in their hotel suite and browsed through his phone. The problem had already taken on a life of its own, with social media rife with rumors and the boys going crazy with inflated headlines. Some said he was out of control, while others said he was a victim of a setup. Yandy crossed her arms tightly and stood at the window, watching the city lights, saying, "We need to be careful with how we handle this," referring to the constant stream of messages that some cast members, friends, and family had sent out, asking what had really happened or offering their support. His body hurt from the previous night, and he was exhausted, but his thoughts would not let him sleep. "What do you want me to do? I know they're waiting for us to make a mistake. Remain silent and let them tell us any story they want." Yandy warned that we need to control the narrative and not just react emotionally. Yandy's phone buzzed, and she paused for a moment before the show's producer called. "Drama, let's say, makes for entertaining television, but this is a little too dramatic." Yandy narrowed her eyes, which were larger than you expected. So you expected something to happen before the producer spoke. We need to get ahead of this because the network is freaking out, and this is turning into a bigger scandal than we expected. The producer paused, then laughed shakily. The producer clarified that this was not the case, saying, "We want you and M to sit down for an exclusive interview." Yandy's jaw tightened, feeling that the producer was well aware of their actions in escalating tensions between MCs and the other cast members, but they were now rushing to fix the damage because it had gotten out of control. "They simply don't want to lose ratings," Yandy muttered, though she hated the idea of giving them the upper hand. "Now they want to clean up their mess. They don't care about cleaning up anything," she said, and hung up after glancing at the male DCs who were observing her intently. Cameras were set up in their suite the following day, and a famous journalist was brought in to ask the pointed questions. The interview began with a screen that showed footage of the fight, and the couple knew they couldn't remain silent because stories from men were already being judged by the court of public opinion, and if they didn't take charge of the story, someone else would. When the journalist turned to the men's side and asked them to explain what was going through their minds at that moment, the men took a deep breath and honestly tried to leave, knowing that things were getting heated. "But I didn't come to Mexico for drama. I came to enjoy myself with my wife." The grainy security footage behind them showed the cast member pushing him repeatedly before I finally snapped. "I won't sit here and pretend that reality TV doesn't love drama." But this wasn't a plot. This man kept pushing and testing me, and yes, I lost my temper. "I'm not proud of it." The journalist nodded. "Some people are saying that you were set up and that this was all done for ratings." "What do you think Yandy did?" Real life shows that when you put people in high-pressure situations with their emotions running high, things can go very wrong rapidly. Mendeecees exhaled, looking down for a moment before looking directly into the camera. "I regret letting someone get the better of me. I regret putting my family through this, but do I regret standing up for myself during the interview?" As fans were starting to unwind, a cast member who had a falling out with NBC went live on Instagram and claimed to be the real victim. The story had reached a new level, and fans posted a plethora of comments expressing varying opinions, some supporting M's and others remaining skeptical. Then he hinted that the altercation had involved more than just some angry words. "Let's just say that some people don't like when you know. Now I'm the bad guy. Come on, man, you don't know the full story," he said, sitting in his car and staring directly into the camera. "I was surprised that he didn't really swing on me like that." That was all it took for the internet to go into overdrive once more, with people speculating about what secrets he was discussing, whether the story was more complex than what MC and Andy were revealing, whether MY was concealing the sinister secret, and whether the altercation between Yandy and Tias following fresh accusations revealed something more significant. M leans back, crosses his arms, and then we do what we always do. "This is getting out of control," so she snapped. "He's trying to change the story to make himself the victim." BC shook his head and let him talk. "He's just trying to stay relevant. But what if people think he's real?" Yandy pressed. They left Mexico a few days later, hoping to move on from the drama. But as soon as they landed in the United States, photographers lined the airport, cameras blazing, asking them questions like, "Did you pay to get out of jail? Will you lose your job on the show?" She wished she could be as calm as he was, but she knew how this game worked once a rumor got going. "We must choose between fighting back and letting this go." After a little interval, Mendeecees grinned. How come neither Yandy raised an eyebrow? She was certain that this was not going to end that evening. But Mendeecees chose to ignore them as they pushed through the mob with Yandy at his side. Tired by the experience, Yandy turned to M as they sat in their home. When Yandy observed that he was considering strategy instead of merely repairing the damage, she understood that this was not only a controversy but also a chance to shift the narrative and draw in viewers. Allow people to converse and conjecture, but when the moment is appropriate, we disclose something bigger than all of this. One thing is certain: despite the ongoing scandal, will Mendeecees and Yandy be able to take charge of the narrative? Or will the rumors only become worse? And what exactly did that cast member mean? They were speculating because, in the reality TV industry, drama was not only a problem, but also a source of power, and they intended to use it. Watch this video, give the channel a subscription, and, to ensure you don't miss anything, turn on notifications. The story's next startling revelation is just beginning, and you won't. Keep checking back to see what comes next.